Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this Friday morning. This is an Uptycs Live webinar, and I am your host, Bronwyn Hudson. I'm also the social media manager here. And a quick reminder that this is actually part two of a two-part webinar series on cloud security. No problem if you haven't participated in the first webinar. We'll be giving you a quick little gloss over of what we covered in that so that you can come with us on this deep dive. And just a couple of quick admin things for the top here. The chat is closed, but the Q&A is open as per usual. So please do feel free to ask questions at any point, especially so that you remember them, and we'll try to get to all of them right at the end. And do feel free to ask any questions that you might have. It's totally fine. So today joining me again are Sudarsan, our Director of Product Management, and Andre, our Director of Cloud Security. And together, they'll be guiding us through three key capabilities. That's Uptycs attack path, security graph, and cloud discovery capabilities. But we will start with some broader context here before we do a deep dive. So let's kick things off. Andre, can you give us a quick recap of webinar one and talk about, sort of broadly speaking, the importance of risk prioritization?
Yeah, definitely. So in webinar one, we covered really the complexity of the cloud. For example, we spoke about human identities, machine identities, how much data they're actually producing. The ephemeral nature of the cloud and trying to keep up with that is exceptionally challenging. On top of that, you have to contend with thousands of APIs, thousands of permissions from day one, and even the best cloud experts will get this wrong from time to time. We also covered the different risk types, such as attack path, and really why they're a priority. And just as a recap, what is an attack path? It reveals possible points of entry into a resource in your environment, as well as the internal movements from those resources to other resources. Which, from the high level view, it sounds easy, but until you actually visualize it and can bring all those data points together, it's actually not that easy to do. But even then, if we get this information and you have an attack path, how do you know what is the priority? And this is where we spoke a little bit about the risk prioritization and the three contexts that we apply to determining risk prioritization, which were the cloud context, the business context, as well as the workload context. All three important for consumers, customers to make decisions as to is that something they should go and spend some time on. So, Bronwyn, as you mentioned, today we're going to go a little more into risk prioritization and attack path, and then we're also going to introduce you to security graph and cloud discovery. Again, all of these contribute to an accurate risk prioritization view, which is very important to understand. Again, the context and how we arrived there. So, without further ado, Sudarsan, can you walk us through some of the risk prioritization view that we have?
Absolutely. So great to be back, Bronwyn and Andre. So before I share, may the demo gods be with me. We are doing a live demo here. Just bear with us. If hopefully there'll be no glitch. But to Andre, to your point, risk prioritization. So what you see here is AWS specific risks we can do for Azure and GCP as well in the same way. Why, to Andre's point, we have multiple context coming together, and we need to use that context to prioritize risks in your cloud environment, right? So what you see here is the risks view in an environment that we have. So the risk can be, of course, we have different categories based on severity. It's critical or high or low or medium. And within the risk itself, what contributed to the risk, we can filter whether it's because of an exposure, whether it's because we found a threat, or whether there are some secrets in that, or there are different categories that actually contribute to a risk, or all of them can contribute to the risk, right? And also from a resourcing standpoint for AWS, you can filter based on I care only about data specific risks, or I care about compute risks, or I care about IAM risks. You can have those kind of a categorization, and automatically this filter will be applied here for you. So in this case, I want to pick only internet exposure and vulnerability specific, where there is both vulnerability and exposure. So as you can see here, there is a risk. In this case, when you say risk, you can figure out risk based on an account or based on a specific resource itself. You can do either way that you want to. In this case, now I'm going to categorized based on accounts. There is an account called CSPM1. I have 26 risks that we identified, and 8 of them are critical, and 18 of them are kind of medium or low, right? So coming back to the risk here, I'm going to click. This is a risk that we give you the details. And we also show you from a workflow perspective, if you want to assign to peer team members, if you want to add exceptions, you don't agree with the risk, you can do all that kind of a workflow model here, right? And then we show the actual resources in your AWS that are impacted because of the risk. And when I click on that, basically it will take you to this page. I don't want to click on it for now, but I'm happy to click. But just now, this is the user, this is the actual resource that is based on what we talked about the risk. We give you the definition of what all contributed to that risk. And one of the areas that contributes to the risk is attack path, as Andre is talking about. We have a risk prioritization for you. We look at the likelihood of a breach. We also look at the severity of the breach if for some reason that the computer instance is breached, right? So in this case, there are multiple factors that contributed to the risk. In this, you'll see that it has an internet exposure. There's not any anomaly behavior there, but there are some malware that we detected. We had some misconfiguration that all of together contributes to the risk, and it drives the priority of this specific resource that has to be taken care of right away. One of the risks that we talked about, which is where we're going to focus on, is attack path, right? So in this case, you can see this EC2 instance is being exposed to the internet via some security misconfiguration, a security group misconfiguration. And this, because of that exposure, you can see that the attacker could move laterally within your environment. And in this case, the attacker can connect to your S3 buckets, or they can connect to your RDS instance, right? This is where the attack path is very important. For attack path, we look into multiple areas. We look at the identity layer. We look at the network reachability. We look at if there are any secrets or SSH keys that are being shared between multiple compute instances. We look at any vulnerabilities or any open ports on that EC2 instance that have a vulnerability there. So we look at multiple factors to see what is the potential probability of an attacker moving laterally in your cloud environment and eventually getting to your crown jewels, in this case, your data, right? So this is basically how we show. So in this case, for attack path, we also look into the identity layer, specifically around what are the permissions, because every single resource has a permission. So if in this case, if I click on an S3 bucket, we show you the actual user, in this case, PTU ATK, right? This is the actual user on that EC2 or an instance profile role. What kind of actions they can do on that specific bucket. They can delete an object, they can list an object, they can do this read, write permission. So all of that is taken into consideration when you think about attack path and how do you prioritize, with attack path being one of the risk facts that leads to the risk within their environment. So just want to stop there for a brief moment and Andre, and the one thing that before I move on, we not only provide the details about it, we also provide guidance on the remediation and the risk. We'll tell you how to fix this in the console. We also provide CLI directions. We also provide API, any specific manual configuration if needed. You can see that right here to fix the misconfiguration where the exposure happens. And that's what leads to the attack path for the attacker. So I'll stop here, but I want to pass it down to Andre. Based on your experience, what have you seen in a real world? How is this attack path useful for customers to derive outcome based on? Can you just share your experiences?
Yeah, so, attack path, one of the biggest benefits that I keep talking about to folks is just the visualization of your environment. So visualizing how a threat actor would actually move into your environment and laterally throughout your environment. Prior to an attack path visualization, you're having to, run multiple SQL queries, different joins, trying to understand all the connectivity, first of all. And then second of all, trying to find out where is the risk within that. So having an attack path that can show you, going off of your example, you have an EC2 instance that's open to the internet. Well, if that EC2 instance has a role that is attached, and that role, let's just say, for example, only has full EC2 permissions. If the threat actor were to get on that EC2 instance, curl the metadata, gain the credentials, or just use the local CLI, at that point, they can then go and scan the rest of the EC2 fleet, identify an EC2 instance that has a a role of interest, call it admin. Because they have full EC2 permissions, they can stop that EC2 instance, they can start it up, inject some user data that has a reverse shell. Once they establish the connection, they now have access to that EC2 instance. So we can show that to you. We can help you visualize how an attack would progress through your environment. And the reason why this is important is, we all know that as cloud security gets bigger and more complex, finding the right talent and resources becomes very challenging. So we're having to, hire in very junior analysts, folks who we want to mentor, grow into this. And we are trying to develop a platform or a view that they can use. They can look at it and understand something bad is going on within this environment. So to back up, when we identify these points of entry and the internal movements, you're able to proactively address them, which will allow you to significantly reduce your security posture, your security risk within your account.
Fabulous. Great insights there. Quick admin note, I just noticed some people trickling in a little bit later. Thank you so much for joining us. Just a quick FYI that the chat is closed, but the Q&A is open. So please do feel free to jump in with any questions that you might have, and we'll answer them at the end. Just wanted to say that. So Sudarsan, going back to you, how does Attack Path and these other tools, how does the security graph tool build on that information?
Yeah, so going back to what Andre said, right? If a security operations, there are different tiers of analyst, right? When you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 analysts, as you triage a specific risk, what the attack path provides is a view of the data relevant to that specific risk that we are talking about. But from a security context perspective, you need to have broader details before triaging an incident at layer 3 or a tier 3 analyst, because you need to have all that information in one place. Oftentimes what happens today is the data is in disparate sources, different places. The value that security graph provides to organizations is you don't have to go and scourge the data from multiple places. We bring all the data to you in a single place. That's what security graph does. So for this EC2 instance, when you think about it for security graph, I can right click, you can see the actual show security graph. I'm not going to click, but I already opened the browser before. So I just want to go with that browser here. So this is a security graph for the same EC2 instance that we talked about earlier. So in this case, this is the security graph. This actually shows you that the top part is the actual security graph. The bottom part, what you see is more of an inventory where you bring in all the context for you. Because at the end of the day, the key challenge in a security operation, the most of the time they are going after figuring out where the data is and how to pivot across the data to get all that context. That's a challenge. That's exactly what the security graph addresses here. So first thing that I want to go a little bit deeper on the top part is around what all do we provide. We know this EC2 instance is in this account. We know this EC2 instance is in this region. What is the size of the hardware? How long has it been up? We also tell you which team owns that EC2, what environment it is running, who's the owner, and what is the expense type for this EC2, right? They're different. These are kind of a business metrics that you can look at. The key part is this is the actual the EC2 instance we talked about, PTO ATK, the same model that we had before. So in this security graph, going back to what Andre said, the workload context, the cloud context, and the business context, right? Those three things, we bring all of that in a much more granular fashion. So let's talk about the cloud context. The cloud context will tell you what is the instance profile role. In this case, here is a role, right? We tell you what is this role even risky for that matter. If you look at the bottom and you click on that, you'll tell you what the role is risky. Is there any cross organization? Is a cross account access available for this role? Or who can access this role at the end of the day, right? What did this role access? You want to get more details about that identity itself and what are the last service accessed by this role. You can get all the data here right in a fingertip when you click on a role, for example, right? Similarly, if you look at other areas, like is there any misconfiguration here? I'm going to focus on the misconfiguration, right? I click on the misconfiguration, it'll tell you what are the misconfiguration in the cloud. It'll take you to the actual misconfiguration as to there's exposed to the internet as a misconfiguration there, right? You can also add exceptions to it because there are some scenarios where you say, I want to allow connections from outbound internet from my other offices. you can provide a specific CIDR block or a specific IP address and exclude it so that it doesn't create false positives. You can do that as well. Right, and then we also show threats. Again, this is on the both the control plane context as well as the workload context. In this case, this is a workload context. There's a container running in that environment, and what are the detections that we found on the container on that specific EC2 instance. So we bring all the data in from a security graph. The one thing that I want to stress about is in the security graph, in addition to the control plane, for certain critical workloads, not everything, certain critical workloads, you might want to have a deep visibility, right? In production, for example, some of them you don't need to have because having a sensor in there is high. It's a very high friction. There is a lot of challenges. We do, as we talked about in the previous webinar, we do provide both a site scanning / agentless approach for less critical workloads. We can also get deep visibility in certain workloads, very critical with a sensor-based approach. We can do both. In the workload context, why is sensor-based approach is important? This is where I wanted to do a little bit deeper and how we can provide. So if you think about as a developer typically is connected to your AWS environment through the CLI or through some shared key model. If your developer laptop is compromised for some reason, or there is a critical detection that you found, this is an example that I would like to give is a LastPass as a Circle CI breach. It started as a DevOps engineer, and that laptop caused compromise. And then from there, the attacker was able to move laterally to the cloud environment. So how do you find that out? You need to have that connection, the bridge between what is connecting to your cloud and what is in the cloud. So we talked about what is in the cloud, but how do you know what is connecting to your cloud? That's exactly where I'm going to show. In this case, you can see that this EC2 instance can be reachable by these specific laptops. Here are the actual laptops, the developer machine that are connecting to that EC2 instance. And if that EC2 instance is a production machine, you want to know what is the posture of that specific device, right? For the laptop that is connecting to that. How are they connecting to that? This is an example where here the list of assets, your endpoint that are connecting to your EC2 instance, and this is the shared key. Access key is used to connect to that EC2 instance in production. You might want to limit the blast radius. At least providing that visibility and shining that light on those is critical for security operations team to understand that context, right? Similarly, there are other areas. For example, you can look at all the bottom, what you see here is the inventory details that I talked about. What are the EC2 details? You don't have to go to any other data source. You have all the data source here for you for triaging and a specific risk. What are the exposure summary? What are my networking configuration? In this case, here is the security groups. It'll tell you the security group ID and what is the associated. So there are a lot of details you can get from this place. What is this? In this case, here is the source, the security group configuration. So there are a bunch of data that you can use to triage that incident. So that's the value that security graph brings to the table when it comes to triaging any risk for that matter. So one thing, Andre, I want to talk to you about what, again, this goes back to how do you think in real world a security graph can add value to customers or organizations? What is your perception?
Yeah, before I get into, I think what we're highlighting here also is just the power of security graph and just the amount of data and disparate data sources it has to take into account. I think we as a company were challenged by this in the beginning, but we were able to solve it. But you think about laptop data, sensor data, cloud config data, Kubernetes container data. It's a lot of information or data coming at you where as a user, you don't have to go look at these disparate data sources. You can just look at the UI and visualize what's actually going on. But to get into the use case, going off of what you've said, everyone thinks the cloud or the S3 bucket are the crown jewels, right? From a historical perspective and a breach perspective, most breaches are starting through developer laptop nowadays. In my opinion, those are the crown jewels, because if you can pop a developer laptop, you potentially have access to Git repositories, you have access to keys that can access into EC2, SSH keys, etc. One of the powerful things with security graph is, as you saw, we can show you which EC2 instances can be accessed from a laptop. Let's assume for a second that laptop is popped and a threat actor establishes a session from the laptop, is able to SSH into the EC2 instance. What we're able to show you is the sessions that were established from the laptop, but also what all the commands that were run from that laptop. So as you look at this, you can in real time see that information. And then secondly, when the threat actor makes their way onto the EC2 instance, we can also show you all the commands they ran from that EC2 instance and when they ran those. So not only can you see kind of that trail of what the threat actor did on the laptop, but also once they hopped across in the account, you're able to see kind of their MO and what they looked at and what they tried to access on that EC2 instance. So again, I think the power here is just the visualization, right? Having a visual of your environment and what all is connected to it, what are the secrets, what are the vulnerabilities. Obviously in this webinar, we can't go over every use case, but the point is there's a lot of data that we're surfacing to help customers determine, is something a risk and should they take action on it?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people in our audience are probably scribbling down like, yay, unified view, right? We're dismantling the silos that this kind of data is in and unifying them in one visualization. That's great. So Sudarsan, I want to go back to you and talk about, so we've gone through attack path and we've gone through security graph. How does all of this information also feed into cloud discovery?
Yeah. So again, this goes back to security operations team. The biggest challenge in cloud is the cloud is so vast. To Andre's point earlier, it's very complex, right? Oftentimes you need to know a specific resource. What is the spatial orientation of that resource? Who are my neighbors? How am I connected? Who am I connecting to? Who am I talking to based on configuration? How do you get the data, right? That's really complex today. If you go to any of your cloud providers as a native cloud provider, it's all there, but how do you stitch all that information together and see who can talk to whom? Or a classic example is if I have an S3 bucket in AWS, how do you know who can access that S3 bucket, right? Or if you had troubleshooting a networking issue in your environment for related to security, or how do you know whether your EC2 is supposed to talk to another EC2? There are different challenges as you go through. What I would, if you want to summarize this in two key value for cloud discovery is number one, for IT infrastructure operations, security operations, it provides a good visualization of the spatial orientation of your cloud assets. Number two, it can help you understand and troubleshoot any identity specific issues, who can access what, and get to the details. So I'll show you what in this case for this EC2. When I click on it, you still have the show relationship. When I click on it, it will take me to this page of the cloud discovery, right? So in this case, if you look at the cloud, I'm just giving an example. Let's say you have a transit gateway as a service. There are multiple services that we support. If you think about transit gateway as an example, if there are multiple regions across the globe that you're connected to, and you want to see how is my networking view happening, whether this region is supposed to talk to another region and how are they connected, there is no way today you can get the data. This is doable, but you have to jump through multiple hoops to get that data, right? And of course, to Andre's point, visualization is key there. If we can visualize this in an easy fashion, that's exactly what the cloud discovery solves from a relationship standpoint. So you see here, this is basically a transit gateway. Where are they connected, which account, and what is the actual connection? Is there any VPC peering there? What kind of transit gateway attachment are connecting to this specific? So you can have all that data from visualization. And if you click on it, it will show the telemetry around that, all of the data right here for you, right? You don't have to go to any different console. You have all the data in the fingertip. So that is one use case. The other one is I talked about the S3 bucket as an example. Let's take this is a real example, right? If I click on S3 bucket, I want to find out, I'm going to search on a specific bucket. I care about the specific bucket. So let's say CSPM1. I want to find out if there is any, so let's take this as an example, right? I'm going to uncheck this one. I like this bucket. I want to know what is happening in this bucket. Right. So this is a bucket. I want to know who all can access this bucket. So I click on this S3 bucket, specific bucket. I show you who can access this bucket. This is where it actually brings up and shows you who the users are. So in this case, this is a bucket. As Andre talked about, there is a machine identity, there is the user identity, like human identities. You can see these are all, there are some human identities, there are some roles. Here are the list of users who can access it. We also look at the roles. What are the roles that can connect? Out of these roles, I can also show me any cross-account roles that can, because cross-account is not a, it's good to have. Sometimes you have to be very careful about how do you define policies, right? I want to highlight what are the cross-account roles. As you can see here, there are 3 cross-account roles that are connecting to this bucket. Is this something that you expected? That's a question that you can ask here. And also, what kind of access can they provide? What is the permission? Can they list? What kind of action can they write? Can they delete? You can see all that right here. In this case, this cross-account role can do any operation on that S3 bucket. Is that how you want the configured? Then you can ask yourself a question. How do you mitigate, reduce your attack surface, or improve your posture when it comes to cloud security? So that's so Andre, you're going back again. I want to pick your brains on how do you think, based on your experience, how is this useful? Can you give some examples?
Yes. So, when I was at AWS, there was a very interesting stat. A very high percentage of customers only use no more than 3 regions. Even though AWS has all these regions and all these services. Anyway, but imagine you're a customer and you're only focusing on, say you have 3 regions. It's very easy for a threat actor to go and use another region right now. You may be saying, well, what if you have a great cloud security strategy and you've locked down the other regions through SCPs? Absolutely. However, I've seen thousands of customers who just don't have their cloud security strategy nailed. So as a threat actor, I can go play around in a completely different region, and unbeknownst to you, if you're not monitoring that, it could go indefinitely. Now you'll look at your bill and you'd say, well, I've got usage in a region I'm not using. But a lot of the time, finance isn't quite speaking to the engineering team or the security team. I know that's changing nowadays, but the point is you can go in there, and unless you are monitoring everything in your environment, you don't know what's being used. And this is an example where Cloud Discovery, we can surface that and show regions in use, connected to other regions through VPCs, or if there's just usage in a very particular region. So visualizing that allows you to see and understand, is something legitimate or illegitimate activity. The other example I can give, and we've seen this happen, is, I'm a threat actor and I compromise an account, a victim's account. From that account, I request a VPC peering establishment with the threat actor's account. The threat actor now establishes VPC peering between the 2 accounts, and they now have communication via private IP space into the account. But as a user or as a security team, if you're not seeing this, if you don't understand how this can work, you may not be looking for it. So it could fly under the radar. But with Cloud Discovery, we will show that to you. We will show you the VPC peering connections within accounts, across different accounts, so that as you look and visualize your environment, you can really apply a security lens to it and say, should this be happening? Should these VPCs be allowed to communicate with each other through these different, within these different accounts? And then we have a lot of companies who have rogue accounts, right? They've, through acquisition, whatever the case is, they may not understand or see all the accounts that are in scope, but through Cloud Discovery, we can easily visualize that for you. So bringing in those accounts and then presenting you all the metadata to allow you to make a decision and say, is this something that should be happening, or should this account have this communication with my production environment, as an example?
Fabulous. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Sudarsan and Andre, for these insights so far. I want to remind our audience too that, it feels like we're scraping the surface in talking about these tools, but we do have a series of blogs that directly mirror this content. They're available. Andre's written them, so they're each deep dives into each of these capabilities. So there's plenty more information available. You can also, of course, schedule a demo and you can ask all the questions that you have, but I will right now transition into a couple of the audience questions that we've gotten. Thank you so much. First, I think a quick practical question. I think we've mainly talked about AWS, but the question is, which CSPs do you offer this functionality for? Sudarsan, you want to take that one?
Sorry, sorry, can you repeat that question, please? Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, which CSPs do you offer this functionality for?
Yeah. So we do all three clouds, AWS, GCP, and Azure. All three clouds. We all these three capabilities. It's all available in multi-cloud.
Great. Second, a similar question. I assume we need to have your agents installed on our laptops to make that end-to-end mapping. And this is, I think, when we were talking about cloud discovery. Or can you connect with others' EDRs?
We can connect to other EDRs as well. That's more of a technology integration. We can consume that data and then decorate our cloud security with that finding. We can do that. Yeah.
Great. And another question just came in. Will this product pick up IoT technology?
It depends on if you have a sensor in IoT, it can, but if you do not have a sensor, then it may not be able to. It depends on what you want to solve for.
Good specific use case question.
But I will say this though, right? So if your IoT is sending that data back to, say, one of your CSPs, say AWS, we can get the config data for that as well as the log data. It's not necessarily that the IoT data has got to send it somewhere. Most likely where that's being sent to, we could integrate that into this product.
Yeah.
Great. And one more. Does Cloud Discovery also take IAM and networking reachability into account?
It does. It does. So we talked about IAM, of course, network reachability. It will take into consideration both those views and give you the visualization. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Great. Last call for questions while we wrap things up here. Thank you all so much for being here and participating. We really appreciate it. Please feel free to reach out, connect with us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter, any of that kind of stuff as well. We produce a lot of excellent threat research, and you can also do more of a deep dive into these products via our blog as well. Sudarsan and Andre, thank you both so much for accompanying me on this webinar series journey. For our audience, you can find both of the recordings for these webinars available pretty much later today, and we'll email them out as well, including the slides from our first webinar. So feel free to access those anytime. And we appreciate you being here for this Uptycs Live webinar. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.